The Western Philosophy, Will Durant. Chapter 9, Nietzsche. Section 3, Nietzsche and Wagerner. Early in 1872, he published his first and his only complete book, The Birth of Tragedy Out of the Spirit of Music. Never had a philologist spoken so lyrically. He told of the two gods whom Greek art had worshipped, at first Dionysus or Bacchus, the god of wine and revelry, of ascending life, of joy in action, of ecstatic emotion and inspiration, of instinct and adventure and dauntless suffering, the god of song and music and dance and drama, and then later Apollo, the god of peace and leisure and the repose, of aesthetic emotion and intellectual contemplation, of logical order and philosophic calm, the god of painting and sculpture and epic poetry. The noblest Greek art was a union of the two ideals, the restless masculine power of Dionysus and the quiet feminine beauty of Apollo. In drama, Dionysus inspired the chorus and Apollo the dialogue. The chorus grew directly out of the procession of the satyr-dressed devotees of Dionysus. The dialogue was an afterthought, a reflective appendage to an emotional experience. The profoundest feature of Greek drama was the Dionysian conquest, pessimism through art. The Greeks were not the cheerful and optimistic people whom we meet with in modern rhapsodies about them. They knew the stings of life immediately and its tragic brevity. When Midas asked Silenus what fate is best for a man, Silenus answered, "Pitiful race of a day, children of accidents and sorrow, why do you force me to say what were better left unheard?" The best of all is unobtainable, not to be born, to be nothing. The second best is to die early. Evidently, this man had little to learn from Schopenhauer or from the Hindus, but the Greeks overcame the gloom of their disillusionment with the brilliance of their art. Out of their own suffering, they made the spectacle of the drama and found that it is only as an aesthetic phenomenon, as an object of artistic contemplation or reconstruction, that existence and the world appear justified. The sublime is the artistic subjugation of the awful. Pessimism is a sign of decay. Optimism is a sign of superficiality. Tragic optimism is the mood of the strong man who seeks intensity and extent of experience, even at the cost of woe, and is delighted to find that strife is the law of life. Tragedy itself is the proof of the fact that the Greeks were not pessimists. The days when this mood begot the Aeschylean drama and the pre-Socratic philosophy were the tremendous days of Greece. Socrates, the type of the theoretical man, was a sign of the loosened fiber of the Greek character. The old Marathonian stalwart capacity of body and soul was more and more sacrificed to a dubious enlightenment. Involvement, progressive degeneration of the physical and mental power. Critical philosophy replaced the philosophical poetry of the pre-Socratics. Science replaced art. Intellect replaced instinct. Dialectic replaced the games. Under the influence of Socrates, Plato, the athlete became an aesthete. Plato, the dramatist, became a logician, an enemy of passion, a deporter of poets, a pre-Christian Christian, an epistemologist. On the temple of Apollo at Delphi, those words of passionless wisdom were inscribed: North Sea Aten and Maddened Agan, which became in Socrates and Plato the delusion that intelligence is the only virtue, and in Aristotle the enervating doctrine of the golden mean. In its youth, a people produced mythology and poetry. In its decadence, philosophy and logic. In its youth, Greece produced Homer and Aeschylus. In its decay, it gave us Euripides, the logician turned dramatist. The rationalist destroyed myth and symbol. The sentimentalist destroying the tragic optimism of the masculine age. The friend of Socrates who replaces the Dionysian chorus with an Apollonian galaxy of dialecticians and orators. No wonder the Delphic oracle of Apollo had named Socrates the wisest of the Greeks, and Euripides the wisest after him. And no wonder that the unerring instinct of Aristophanes comprised Socrates and Euripides in the same feeling of hatred, and saw in them the symptoms of a degenerate culture, it is true that they recanted that Euripides' last plague, the Bacchus, is his surrender to Dionysus, and the prelude to his suicide, and that Socrates imprisoned took to practicing the music of Dionysus to ease his conscience. Perhaps thus he had to ask himself, what is not intelligible to me is not therefore unreasonable. Perhaps there is a realm of wisdom from which the logician is banished. Perhaps art is even a necessary correlative of and supplement to science. But it was too late. The work of the logician and the rationalist could not be undone. Greek drama and Greek character decayed. The surprising thing had happened when the poet and the philosopher recanted. Their tendency had already conquered. With them ended the age of heroes and the art of Dionysus. But perhaps the age of Dionysus may return. Did not Kant destroy once and for all the theoretical reason and the theoretical man? And did not Schopenhauer teach us again the profundity of instinct and the tragedy of thought? And is not Richard Wagner another Aeschylus restoring myths in the symbols and uniting music and drama again in Dionysian ecstasy? Out of the Dionysian root of the German spirit, a power has arisen which has nothing in common with the primitive conditions of Socratic culture, namely German music in its vast solar orbit, from Bach to Beethoven, from Beethoven to Wagner. The German spirit has too long reflected passively the Apollonian art of Italy and France. Let the German people realize that their own instincts are sounder than these decadent cultures. Let them make a reformation in music as in religion, pouring the wild vigor of Luther again into art and life. Who knows but that out of the war truths of the German nation, another age of heroes dawns, and that out of the spirit of music tragedy may be reborn. In 1872, Nietzsche returned to Basel, still weak in body, but with a spirit burning with ambition and loath to consume itself in the drudgery of lecturing. I have before me work enough for 50 years, and I must mark time under the yoke. Already he was a little disillusioned with the war. The German Empire is extirpating the German spirit, he wrote. The victory of 1871 had brought a certain coarse conceit into the soul of Germany, and nothing could be more hostile to spiritual growth. An impish quality in Nietzsche made him restless before every idol, and he determined to assail this dulling complacency by attacking its most respected exponent, David Strauss. I enter society with a dual standard, gave that advice. In the second of his well named Thoughts Out of Season, Schopenhauer, as educator, he turned his fire upon the chauvinistic universities. Experience teaches us that nothing stands so much in the way of developing great philosophers as the custom of supporting at once in state universities. No state would ever dare to patronize such men as Plato and Schopenhauer. The state is always afraid of them. He renewed the attack in the future of our educational institutions, and in the use and abuse of history, he ridiculed the submergence of the German intellect in the minutiae of antiquarian scholarship. Already in these essays, two of his distinctive ideas found expression: that morality as well as theology must be reconstructed in terms of the evolution theory, and that the function of life is to bring about not the betterment of the majority, who, taken as individuals, are the most worthless types, but the creation of genius, the development and the elevation of superior personalities. The most enthusiastic of these essays was called Richard Wagerner in Bayreuth. It hailed Wagner as a signified who has never learned the meanings of fear, and as founder of the only real art, because the first to fuse all the arts into a great aesthetic synthesis, and it called upon Germany to realize the majestic significance of the coming Wagner Festival. Bayreuth signifies for us the morning sacrament on the day of battle. This was the voice of youthful worship, the voice of an almost family refined spirit, who saw in Wagner something of that masculine decisiveness and courage which went later into the conception of the Superman. But the worshipper was a philosopher too, and recognized in Wagerner a certain dictatorial egotism, offensive to an aristocratic soul. He could not bear Wagner's attack upon the French. In 1871, Paris had not been kind to Tannhauser, and he was astounded at Wagner's jealousy of Brahms. The central theme, even of this laudatory essay, boded no good for Wagner. The world has been orientalized long enough, and men now yearn to be Hellenized. But Nietzsche already knew that Wagner was half Semitic. And then in 1876 came Bayreuth itself and Wagnerian opera night, up to night, without cuts. And Wagnerians and the emperors and the princes and the princelies and the idle rich crowding out the impecunious devotees. Suddenly it dawned upon Nietzsche how much of Geyer there was in Wagner, how much the reign of Nibelungs owed to the theatrical effects which abounded in it, and how far the mellows that some missed in the music had passed into the drama. I had had visions of a drama overspread with a symphony, a form growing out of the lead. But the alien appeal of the opera drew Wagner irresistibly in the other direction. Nietzsche could not go in that direction. He detested the dramatic and the operatic. I should be insane to stay here, he wrote. I await with terror each of these long music evenings. I can bear no more. And so he fled without a word to Wagner, and in the midst of Wagner's supreme triumph, while all the world worshipped, fled, tired with disgust of all that is feminism and undisciplined rhapsody in that romanticism, that idealistic lion, that softening of the human conscience, which had conquered here one of the bravest souls, and then in far away Sorrento, whom should he encounter but Wagner himself, resting from his victory and full of a new opera he was writing. Pass forward. It was to be an explanation of Christianity, pity and fleshless love, and a world redeemed by a pure fool, the fool in Christ. Nietzsche turned away without a word and never spoke to Wagner thereafter. It is impossible for me to recognize greatness which is not united with candor and sincerity towards oneself. The moment I make a discovery of this sort, a man's achievements count for absolutely nothing with me. He preferred Siegfried, the rebel, to Parsifal, the saint, and could not forgive Wagner for coming to see in Christianity a moral value and a beauty far outweighing its theological defects. In the case of Wagner, he lays about him with neurotic fury. Wagner flatters. Wagner flatters every nihilistic, Buddhistic instinct and disguises it in music. He flatters every kind of Christianity and every religious form and expression of decadence. Richard Wagner, a decrepit and desperate romantic, collapsed suddenly before the Holy Cross. Was there no German then with eyes to see? With pity in his conscience to bewail this horrible spectacle, am I then the only one he caused to suffer? And yet I was one of the most corrupt Wagnerians. Well, I am the child of this age, just like Wagner. Example, a decadent, but I am conscious of it. I defended myself against it. Nietzsche was more Apollonian than he supposed, a lover of the subtle and the delicate and the refined, not of wild Dionysian vigor, nor of the tenderness of wine and song and love. Your brother, with his air of delicate distinction, is a most uncomfortable fellow, said Wagner to foster Nietzsche. Sometimes he is quite embarrassed at my jokes, and then I crack them more madly than ever. There was so much of Plato in Nietzsche. He feared that art would unteach men to be hard, being tender-minded. He supposed that all the world was like himself, dangerously near the practicing Christianity. There had not been wars enough to suit the gentle professor, and yet in his quiet hours he knew that Wagner was as right as Nietzsche, that Parsifal's gentleness was as necessary as Siegfried's strength, and that in some cosmic way these cruel oppositions merged into wholesome, creative unities. He liked to think of this stellar friendship that still bound him silently to the man who had been the most valuable and fruitful experience of his life. And when, in a lucid moment of his final insanity, he saw a picture of the long dead Wagner, he said softly, "Him I loved much." Today's work is over.